it pulled together into a single place artists, sculptors, architects, textile designers. I think someone taught the ballet there.
Hello and welcome to Creative Crush, a podcast in which marketing's smartest minds step away from the brand and talk about the piece of creative work or the creative inspiration that they keep coming back to time and time again. Today we are speaking to the brilliant Adam Lawrenson. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do, Adam?
Yes, I will try. I've worked in the creative arts for the last 20 years across different disciplines, uh, branding, product design, service design, advertising, growth, consultancy, and I now run I guess, half consultancy accelerator, half investment business that invests capital in fast growth businesses, but then supports them through the skills that I've learned over the last 20 years. Product, brand, marketing, growth.
Very interdisciplinary skills, we should say there. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about who you're going to be talking about today, or what you're going to be talking about? Who is your creative crush?
For me, it's not a single person or a single moment in time. It's an art movement called the Bauhaus. It ran from I think 1919 to 1930s.
When we talk about modern design and architecture, one of the most significant movements that comes to our mind is the Bauhaus. Founded in 1919, the Bauhaus was not just a school, it was a groundbreaking approach that reshaped the way we think about modern creativity.
The thing that I guess initially interested me in the Bauhaus is, yeah, I mean, you've just said it there, it's multidisciplinary nature. It pulled together into a single place artists, sculptors, architects, textile designers. I think someone taught the ballet there. They had craftsmen, they had high conceptual artists, they had builders of cities, and they brought them all together to this sort of single place to try and build the future. In fact, I think that's what Bauhaus means. It's a house of building or a building house, you know, a school of building, if you like. Interestingly, that seems sort of more and more connected to what I do now than what interested me initially.
Well, just taking you back to that initial interest, um, can you take us all the way back to when you first heard the name Bauhaus and kind of discovered a little bit more?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was all I wanted to do was be an artist at school, and you know, properly obsessed over that. Wanted to go to art school. Um, Neared the end of my school career, and I guess got that sort of moment of reality where you start to realize that the chances of you making any cash doing fine art was vanishingly small, and had second thoughts. You know, all I was into was conceptual art as well. I was really interested in the concept behind things, and therefore got into super niche art. Very, very abstract, very, very conceptual. You know, did some quite odd things, I think, at school as part of my A level arts. But just realized that probably wasn't the most sensible thing to do. So went and studied art history and architecture and philosophy at university. And most of it was just so extreme. You know, like I said, I was into conceptual art, and yet the things that you were taught at university as part of an art history degree, and indeed philosophy, was so extreme in the way in which they sort of philosophized about what it is that the artist was there to do and was trying to achieve. And then, as part of an architectural course, sort of found the Bauhaus, and it was just a light bulb moment. It was this moment where you could connect, and there were some pretty wacky people who were part of the Bauhaus. It wasn't all, restrained industrial designers. There was some pretty out there characters, but their main thing was to try and connect that conceptual uh, high art with modern industrial processes to try and mass produce almost these um, uh, these conceptual ideas. And I was just fascinated by that. One, fascinated by the kind of cross functionality of bringing all of these people together that had never worked together previously, and secondly, the fact that you had a kind of commercial angle to it, the first sort of moment where you could see what kind of commercial artists could do.
Can I just read you a little bit from Walter Gropius, who kind of founded the school? He wrote this manifesto, and this end bit of the manifesto just really kind of sums it up. The first line is, "Let's create a new guild of craftsmen without class distinctions that raise an arrogant barrier between craftsman and artist." Next bit, it's a bit of a long sentence, to stick with me. "Together, let us desire, conceive, and create the new structure of the future, which will embrace architecture and sculpture and painting in one unity, and which will one day rise towards heaven from the hands of a million workers like a crystal symbol of a new faith." I love it. It's great. It's such a brilliant manifesto.
I think that is the dawn of it. So that'll be 1919, and I think there's got a sort of Fenninger sort of woodcut on the front of it. Um, Later, I think, they were in Weimar at the time, and then they got kicked out effectively by the Weimar Republic for being too lefty, and they got moved to Dessau, where Gropius actually built the entire building and all of the interiors and all the furniture. So it was this sort of monument to everything Bauhaus that was everything multidisciplinary. And I think he produced a sort of second manifesto at that point where it becomes even more commercialized, even more sort of industrial, even more sort of machine as medium, even more as I think, it's Corbusier, wasn't it? He said it's sort of a building as a machine for living later on, all inspired from this moment. And I think then you go and look at, Dieter Rams and his sort of 12 principles of design, and it's basically rewritten Bauhaus stuff, taking out the superfluous, um, making sure there was nothing by accident, making sure that every detail is there to, perform a, purpose or function, form as function, which is, I mean, if you've ever read any sort of UI, UX sort of books or product design thinking, it is littered with it. So you sort of go Bauhaus, Rams, iPhone, and then everything sort of product design after that. It's kind of interesting.
Well, I was saying to super producer Chris before this call that I sat down to do a little bit of research for this call yesterday, and I was trying to think, well, how has Bauhaus touched the modern world and touched my life? And I looked down and I realized I was sat in a Wasili chair. So, Chris put a picture of a Wasili chair here for people who are watching. And I was drinking like lemon water, as you can see now, and I'd squeezed it with a Stark lemon squeezer, which is massively influenced by it. One of my lamps is massively influenced by the Bauhaus lamps, and the font that I use most when I'm doing design things is Futura, which I don't know whether you know is massively influenced. And the story of Futura itself is really, really fascinating. It connects to the rise of the Nazis and the Bauhaus philosophy in really fascinating ways. So it really is just everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, all of the design layouts and grid systems that you will work on, whether you work in Figma or before that material design or grid layouts, etc., were all designed by Moholy Nagy and Albers and Itten, etc. Those grid systems and Mondrian after that, I guess, were designed by them. The thinking with color theory, with with accent colors and primary colors. All the UI interaction sort of principles are based on that, as well as, yeah, like you say, all the typography, all the sans serif sort of predominance, all comes from there. Well, this is the thing. It's easy now to post rationalize that it all comes from there, and then you find out as you dig into it, it doesn't quite. And obviously, it was it's easy to sort of point back to that point, but there was no other place that I guess defined the concept or the thinking for the disciplines that we work in.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to say that uh, the Bauhaus school and the movement is post-rationalized is great, but all those things might have happened anyway. But that doesn't matter because sometimes it takes Walter Gropius to create the space for all these incredibly talented people to come and work together for it to go and influence other people anyway. So, history has given us people that have done that. I come from Manchester in the UK. The very first time, one of my first favorite groups happened to be a group called Bauhaus. The very first time I went to see Bauhaus was at a club called the Hacienda after it had just opened. And that was run by a guy called Tony Wilson, who was obsessed with modernism and just wanted to create a space, these incredible people, interdisciplinary people, to come and work together. So its influences, it really is everywhere.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, great salesmen. I mean, we've seen in agency land, there are many, many agencies or studios which are kind of creating the new form, new way of thinking about it. And then there's one or two who become famous because they're the ones who sell it best, who write it down, who understand how to sort of, yeah, absorb all of the influence that's around them and turning it into, a movement, a school. Ultimately, it's kind of great branding, in its purest sense. But yeah, I mean, you can kind of go, you know, to plenty of places before that influence it, whether it's sort of Distill or Dada or even I think Peter Behrens, who a lot of the people who came into the Bauhaus, so um, Mies van der Rohe and Walter Gropius sort of worked with Peter Behrens before. I think he was the first person to create a design system for AEG. And that was, designing everything. So the letterheads, the logo, the posters, the building itself. And then they came and did a similar thing, I guess, at the Bauhaus, but not the first time it was done, but certainly the time it was best sold.
Can I just take you back for a moment to your university days? Can you remember what was the thing or the person or the idea that took you from thinking this is interesting to, oh wow, this is kind of, this is quite game changing in terms of how I see the world?
Yeah, it started in architecture through Gropius and everything that he was doing to sort of define what became the international style, I guess. The Bauhaus itself was fascinating because they brought all of these people together. I mean, you talk about, startups now talking about talent density, and you know, I mean, anybody worked there, you know, and that seems unrelated to it as well. Kandinsky was mad. He thought that his paintings were going to create a second coming. That history itself would end. But he was the guy who did the color theory there. And he's the sort of person who, is some ways, influences rational branding today. And he's a madman. And so it was really interesting that you could bring together these people in service of something pretty commercial and rational. That bit was, absolutely fascinating to me. And then, yeah, I left uni and did a postgrad at Falmouth College of Art in creative advertising, and then got into many of the things that you kind of learn from there, layout design, typography, headline, the way in which you read a poster, that all sort of goes back to that. Branding, was one of the other kind of big things that I did. Never think about, traditional branding, logo design, comes from there, like I said, color theory. And then you get into the really rational design systems, components, etc. of modern product design.
How did the influence show up in your work?
I guess the backbone of it is cross functionality, and if you look what happened at the beginning of the Bauhaus, they bring people in and they would basically break down what they thought they knew about the visual world or about their craft, and they would teach them about all the different disciplines. And so early on in my career, and again, it was another thing that they said. Now I think about it, which was they tried to sort of break down the fine art is the best, architecture is the best, because they're just not. And I've been in so many advertising agencies at the start of my career where they just thought that was the thing. And they were so snooty of everything else. And the same when you went into branding agencies, so snooty of everything that wasn't the bit of branding that they thought was the important bit. And you can do the same for any of the disciplines. And I never understood that. It never made any sense to me. I wanted to learn all of them because the thing that was important was the the business that you're building, the multidisciplinary thing. That was always what fascinated me about it, and why I keep returning to it, because the thinking behind it and the way in which you kind of approach your creative discipline just made sense.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that was really kind of fascinating um, about their approach was they put ultimately it was about people. Everything about Bauhaus was about people, whether it was the people who were designing, most importantly, the people who were using the things. That was kind of what was most important. How they designed for something to be super usable. And to do that, as you've said, you kind of have to strip away a lot of the for want of a better word, unnecessary uh fancy design and get straight to the usability of it, but still be able to do that in a very, very beautiful way. And that will just serve anyone forever. It's just such a brilliant kind of approach to having all elements of your work, putting the user first.
Yeah, I mean, user-centered design basically can be traced directly back to that, and being able to remove everything that's not in service of the service that you were trying to build. And you know that entire design practice, I guess, has got its roots there. I guess the sort of contradictory part of it, and we've all seen this, when you're trying to build a sort of practice in which you're um, working from best practices, and that's useful in terms of what you do. Um, but if but there's also an importance to sort of do something that's a little bit out there as well, to kind of push the boundaries. And they were the best at framing how form follows function, try and create something usable. But your Wasili chair is renowned for being quite uncomfortable. It's perfect. It's just the structure of a chair, so that it is not trying to be a chair. It is trying to be a support structure from which a person can sit on it. And so everything else is sort of stripped back and removed. And the problem is that they've left with something that is a little bit uncomfortable, because they've been so purist in their desire to sort of create something. And you see that in design all the time. People who have taken that sort of slightly too far. But in doing so, they've kind of created a way of thinking that then has helped people sort of go through, user-centered design, but taken to its ultimate limits.
So, as someone who's inspired by the Bauhaus and whose primary role today is bringing multidisciplinary people together to create new things, what do you think are the key disciplines that are designing the future? Because that's what the Bauhaus was. It was bringing together who was going to design the future. What do you think are the most important disciplines today?
Gosh, great question. I think it moves all the time, and it is related to the point I said earlier about, you know, not, or being open to different disciplines. that's effectively one of the key skills in a sort of multidisciplinary world, is being able to appreciate the other skill sets that are involved in building something, and making sure that you can conduct those different skill sets with enough knowledge to understand how they work and how they can contribute, but also the humility to sort of understand that there's going to be people who have got, greater levels of depth in there. I think the other part, and this is just the way the world will continue to go as the tools progress, is that you have to be sort of more T-shaped in yourself. I've never been an engineer, but I'm getting closer and closer to engineering in the world of AI, and the same as an engineer is getting closer and closer to product in the world of AI for exactly the same reason. And the tools are proliferating. That means that, creativity, concept, cross functionality are becoming I guess, the tokens for building the future. You can adopt the right tools, and you can get people who have got a broad understanding of the different disciplines, don't necessarily any of the specialisms. They're the ones who are going to build the future and be able to build the future at the pace that is going to be required to keep up, because bloody hell, it's going quick, isn't it?
To wrap things up, is there one piece of design that you always think to, that when you think about Bauhaus?
There's, I guess I've been to a lot of the buildings, and a lot of them are sort of time and a place. They couldn't really crack it because um, they wanted to create these buildings that effectively you could see the function of them, and the materials, for all the reinforced concrete, etc., don't really allow for that, and hence a lot of those modernist buildings have somewhat, cracked and fallen into disrepute, and a lot of it hasn't worked. But there's a few that, really have. If you've ever been, and they also show the contradiction, I guess, of it anyway. So if you've been to the Seagram building in New York, Mises' building, obviously post Bauhaus, but inspired by all of the buildings that he's kind of created. And it's the sort of, on the surface of it, it's like any other skyscraper, and yet it's not. It's amazing. It's so beautiful. It's so perfect, and it sort of stood the test of time. It looks immaculate today. And obviously, there's a part of it which is he was great and has been looked after, etc. But the other, I think it's still the most expensive facade ever hung on a skyscraper. It's bronze. It's prohibitively expensive. So it's kind of, the only way to make it work is to have materials that are so fiendishly expensive that it therefore isn't an industrial mass-produced building, so therefore it doesn't work. but it's beautiful.
Adam, thank you for taking part in Creative Crush. If you are listening for the first time, please subscribe, like, and share wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, just hit a like in the button below, and thank you for listening.